What could you learn if you spent decades watching every politician, from the president to first-term members of Congress, come in and out of the nation's capital, some retiring on their own terms, others in disgrace? What could you learn if you had a connection to almost every member of Congress, had a contact in nearly every cabinet office, and yes, could even track down former presidents when needed? But more than memorizing names, what if you built relationships with many of them by listening? I'll introduce you to a man who knows just about everyone in Washington and has the Rolodexes to prove it. John Gizzi has seen it all, or close to it. First as a writer for Ronald Reagan's favorite conservative magazine, Human Events, and now as senior White House correspondent for Newsmax. He spent tens of thousands of hours watching politicians go from relative anonymity to the Oval Office, from a blip on the pollster's radar to the leader of the free world seemingly overnight. Today, I'm going to ask John about what he observed at the beginning of a president's term on the very first day of office at the inauguration, because it's at this moment that every president returns to the language of faith, asking God for guidance, reaffirming the national creeds. Then with three words, "So help me God," an ordinary citizen becomes Mr. President. What can this celebrated reporter tell us about faith in the presidency? Well, watch this.
In post-World War II Washington, few symbols are more directly linked to political access and power than the Rolodex. And like few reporters in the capital city before or since, John Gizzi's career has been built on the anachronistic 1958 invention. Gizzi has a collection of nearly 60 rotating card files filled with insiders, outsiders, power brokers, and the nearly powerful. It's how he gets the story. As the chief White House correspondent for Newsmax, Gizzi is the quintessential newsman. As a professional writer, Gizzi is a trained listener, and as an opinion writer for Newsmax, a prolific social media voice. And as a White House correspondent, he's observed the way politicians have mastered the art of faith in the public square. So how have presidents viewed the role of faith from their first minutes in office to the last? And is America's tradition of embracing a national faith in God a fading formality or a rising sentiment?
Especially we pray that our concern shall be for all the people, regardless of station, race, or calling. May cooperation be permitted and be the mutual aim of those who, under the concepts of our Constitution, hold to differing political faiths, so that all may work for the good of our beloved country and thy glory. Amen.
We are so glad to have John Gizzi with us today, and what a gem of a man. You've seen it all, and the audience should know that you and I have known each other now for
36 years.
36 years.
Yes, going back to when Joe Watkins was in a different incarnation. He was a Hoosier running for Congress in Indiana.
That's right.
And quite honestly, in those days, reporting for Human Events, anyone who would take on the late Congressman Andy Jacobs merited attention because he was just seemingly unbeatable. Beaten in 1972, he came back in 1974, and anyone who ran against him was tempted by the race but could never quite do it. And Joe Watkins was in that long litany, and of course, as a result of him not beating Congressman Jacobs, he became Pennsylvania's adopted son.
That's right. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, those, it seems like another lifetime, but those were some great memories, and it's really great to have you on the show today. When did it all start for you? I mean, when did you start caring about politicians? And given your illustrious career, why didn't you ever think about running for office?
Gosh, my goodness. Well, where do I start? Growing up in Connecticut, I became quite a fan of the newspapers. It started off reading the comic strips, the stories such as Dick Tracy and Terry and the Pirates, and my favorite, Rip Kirby, about a detective who was also a criminologist and quite a swinger in New York. And from there I got to read the news stories, and then a book in particular Alan Drury's Advise and Consent had a very big impact on me.
What did your parents do?
My father was a Teamster, and he worked for Table Talk Pies in Connecticut. My mom was an executive secretary, and they were both very hardworking people. And I think the ability, number one, to work hard, and two, to follow up with people and remember people, I inherited from them.
You think they ever thought that you would end up here, that you'd be nationally known, that you'd be a friend of presidents, that you would know all these members of Congress and these cabinet members, and that you'd be so well known? I mean, a household name to the rich and powerful in D.C. Did you think your parents, when you were growing up, ever had any notion that you might be headed that way?
Goodness, no. They thought that I would have become very pompous if they ever suspected that. No, and I will say, since you mentioned my mom and dad, and Mom I lost in 2014 at the age of 92. My dad went to heaven, I'm sure of that, to join her in 2018 at age 97. So I've got good genes there.
Absolutely.
And I became interested in politics through reading Advise and Consent, reading the newspapers, and then just following politics in my home state of Connecticut, and then eventually coming to Washington and working for Human Events, the National Conservative Weekly.
When did you start doing that?
1979.
Yeah.
And I said at the time I had no experience. I had not done the internships that I so recommend to young people today. They just weren't around then. And I worked there nights while I held another job during the day as a clerk typist. And I said, give me the experience. And in a short time, they made me a reporter. And, well, I guess the rest is history. One other thing, you asked me if I ever thought about running for office myself. I was not Joe Watkins or others pursuing it, but I'll say I've had the second best thing, and that's being married to a former office holder. My wife, Colleen, was the youngest female member of the Michigan legislature, elected at 22 from a Democratic district as a Republican. She served 4 terms and became the first woman to run for governor of the Wolverine State in 1986. And she lost the primary, but the man who won asked her to be his running mate, much as Ronald Reagan turned to George Bush. And that was Bill Lucas, who was the first black man.
Bill Lucas, yes, I remember him, yeah.
To be nominated for governor.
Yeah.
And they lost, and she later went to Washington, and she never ran for office again, but she went on another kind of adventure in her life, marrying me.
And you never, though, were affected with the bug to run for office. You much prefer to be on the side that you're on, reporting, talking to these elected officials and these candidates, and then writing about them.
Very few journalists make it in office holding themselves. It's a hard transition. Winston Churchill was a journalist, John F. Kennedy was, and people have gone from broadcast journalism. Jesse Helms, certainly. He was a television editorialist. Bob Dornan in California hosted a talk show on local television in the LA area. Bruce Hershenson, who was best man at my wedding, was a commentator on the ABC affiliate in Los Angeles, later lost a close and hard-fought race for the U.S. Senate, and then went on to teach at Pepperdine. But for the most part, it's very hard to find people who make that kind of transition.
Yeah.
You get so busy covering people of both parties that you never really can be involved in a party yourself. I don't make donations to candidates, for example.
You become friendly with them, though. I mean, you become friends with people, and
Sure. On both sides, it's good to have, and you've got to have balanced reporting at all times. Every time somebody starts to say you're talking too much to Republicans, well, I check out someone like Joe Lieberman, a very independent Democrat, to talk to. Just in the last week, I was in Waterbury, Connecticut, my dad's hometown, and had quite a chat with the Democratic mayor of his hometown, Mayor Neil O'Leary, the former police chief, who's very much involved in preserving the statues of Christopher Columbus in his city. I might add he has a very big Italian-American population there.
Yes. So how do you've got a memory that is unreal. I mean, you don't forget anything. You don't forget the people that have run for office. You just have an amazing knack for remembering names. How do you do that? Is that natural, or is that something you learned? Especially, and it's an important skill to have, especially when you're talking to members of Congress. But you remember everything. You remember who ran, what year, what the outcome was.
Well, I think part of that has to do with the fact that you never know where people will come back in different forms. And let me give you a good example. James Baker, the former Secretary of State under George H.W. Bush and White House Chief of Staff under Ronald Reagan. He's the subject of a new biography out, The Man Who Made Washington Work. He is considered the gold standard for White House Chiefs of Staff, along with Leon Panetta for the Democratic side. And one thing about Jim Baker that's almost forgotten, but I think the biography dusts off, he, in his one attempt to win elective office, was defeated. He lost a race for Attorney General of Texas in 1978. Had he won, his career would have gone in a much different direction, I believe. And so many people throughout history fail at the polls and then come back in other incarnations. And I'll give you an example. The last three presidents before Donald Trump were all defeated in initial races for the U.S. House of Representatives.
That's right, Barack Obama lost to
George W. Bush lost in a race in Texas, and Bill Clinton lost a squeaker of a House race for Congress in Arkansas in 1974. Now, by most standards, reporters who want figures who are au courant would throw out the business cards of those people. They're defeated House candidates, Joe Watkins, and one finds they come back in different forms. I can remember sitting by John Kerry when he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at a press breakfast hosted by the Christian Science Monitor, and I was discussing with him his first run for office in 1972 when he was defeated for the U.S. House of Representatives. He didn't really like the way the conversation was going about his one loss, but he did lose to a Republican that year, and of course, look where he was after that. The political graveyards, de Gaulle once said, are filled with indispensable men. I don't want these indispensable men or women to go to the graveyards, because I think they'll arise again like Lazarus, and they have.
Yeah. Well, you've known all these presidents as well. I mean, which presidents that you've been with and gotten to know have most fascinated you? I mean, you Reagan,
Yes.
H.W. Bush, Clinton, W. Bush, Obama.
Let me tell you that Barack Obama is one of the most fascinating people I've talked to and covered. And again, when I say talk to, I've talked to him at the White House Christmas party. I saw him at White House press briefings. We never had an extensive interview. I hope that'll change sometime. And let me tell you why. Senator Obama's election was stunning, to say the least. A state senator who beats two wealthy people in a primary who can use their own money for a race. And he just had a lot of charisma and a very capable campaign team, including David Axelrod and his media maestro and Robert Gibbs, who later became press secretary. And the fact that someone's able to go from state senate to U.S. Senate to the presidency in less than 5 years is
unheard of.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And something else to remember, John Kennedy and Bill Clinton were both younger than Barack Obama when they became president, and both were far better known and established. Jack Kennedy was a war hero, the son of a wealthy man, had served in Congress 14 years. You knew about him when he became president. You had a good idea of what he would do. Bill Clinton was Attorney General of his state at 30, the second youngest governor in American history at 32, and chairman of the National Governors Association, head of the Democratic Study Group. You knew about him when he came in. Not so much Barack Obama. he still remains a fascinating, even elusive figure. And I think biographers of the future will really have to work hard to get the real Obama.
So these presidents are very different people.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't all, many of them have talked about a personal faith. Not all of them. Some of them are more guarded about that or don't express it in the same way. Give me your take on that, on the role that a president's personal faith has played in one shaping their candidacy and their presidency.
Ronald Reagan, for one, we know that he would often refuse to appear at certain events because he did not believe using religion for public advancement was a good thing. And yet he spoke to the National Association of Religious Broadcasters when he spoke of the Soviet Union as the evil empire. We know from his diaries he was a man of prayer and faith and had quite an interesting upbringing. His mother was Protestant, and he went to church with her. His brother went to church with their father, and he was a daily communicant in the Catholic Church. So he certainly knew about faith, and we know from his own writings it was an important part of his life.
Did it change after he got shot?
Well, he said, and he told the late Roman Catholic Cardinal Cook of New York, all time that I have belongs to him. And so he certainly thought about the limited time that our Maker gives us on earth and what he was going to do with it. And that's Reagan in his own words. I would point out that Bill Clinton said that up to the period he was defeated for governor in 1980, he had been in for one two-year term and lost, he was lax in his faith and not a regular churchgoer. And after that, he would go to church regularly and sing in the choir, and it became more part of his life at the time. And again, these are his own words about it. I think George W. Bush probably has been the most visibly spiritual president that I can recall in recent times. One thing about him was that he could speak of a born-again experience. He could talk about his own conquest of heavy drinking and how it turned his life around. And many times, people who were delivering things to him in the Oval Office found him kneeling in prayer there. And it certainly was a very big factor. His father loved to tell people he's read the Bible, not once, but twice. And so I definitely think he was a man of faith. And he was in many ways ecumenical. He spoke to the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast once and was introduced as our second Catholic president. And he said, "I'm honored to be called that, but don't tell Laura. She's a Methodist."
Do you think it's an important thing for a president to have?
Oh, yeah. To be grounded in faith?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Because speaking for myself, when I have been down, I know that I can just turn to God and have a discussion with him, and it will get me more focused. And I think I speak for a lot of people saying it's better to have prayer in your life to do everything. The book of Isaiah says, "Come now and let us reason together." And I think many times when I'm ready to think a bad thought about someone or engage in an argument, the words of Isaiah come back to me. And I think certainly with presidents who have to make big decisions, having that conversation with the man upstairs is something that's been a help to them. And I think if you read the memoirs of presidents or read in-depth biographies, you'll see the hand of God, the role of God in every one of them. Harry Truman was someone who was quite a biblical scholar, and he would frequently turn to the Bible for guidance. And at one point he said, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, said, "Well, you can trust me, Mr. President, but remember, even Jesus had one betrayer," meaning, of course, Judas. And in Truman's interpretation, he said no. He said he had three: doubting Thomas, Peter, who denied him in the garden, and Judas. And that was the way Truman interpreted it.
Wow. And think of the heavy decisions that Truman had to make. I mean, he had to make the decision to drop the atom bomb twice.
Right.
On Japan.
Yeah.
And
save the lives of 1 million American servicemen. Everyone who was in the service at the time in the Pacific, I remember Louis Goldstein, the Democratic controller of Maryland, said, I campaigned for Truman all up and down the state because he saved my life in 1945. He was going to be part of the invasion going into Japan, and he might have lost his life. I might add that Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Germany, and Ronald Reagan agreed that their favorite post-war president was Truman because of the decisions he made, saving Greece, having the Marshall Plan to save Europe, saving post-war Germany. And so he did certainly make big decisions, and you know that he turned to Scripture many times.
So you've had the benefit of witnessing much of this in person, and certainly of reading about it and writing about it, and knowing a number of our modern day presidents personally. When we have our inauguration in January of 2021, what do you think is the proper tone for whoever the president is that takes the oath of office that day? What is the proper tone? The nation is so divided. We have people who are at each other's throats, and disagreeing on just about everything, and which is a challenge for our country going forward. What is if you were the president of the United States, or somebody who's certainly observed, what in your mind would be the right tone for the president of the United States to set in that inaugural acceptance speech in January of 2021?
Deuteronomy teaches we blame causes, not men. And I think if we can establish the fact that we have situations in which we disagree strongly, but among people we should not disagree, that would be the right spiritual tone to strike. Now, there's many other things that presidents can say at the time. Richard Nixon, in his 1969 inaugural, strongly talked about a nation not black, not white, but Americans. And I think something along those lines would be very good to do. Ross Perot once said, if he became president, the first words after taking the oath would be, I'm Ross and you're the boss. So I think respect for people is something we should have in mind.
John Gizzi, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
I can't believe it went by so quickly.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Learn more about Joe Watkins and the mission of this program at joewatkins.net. And tell Joe what you thought about today's program in the comment box.
Let's talk now with our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
Well, Joe, that was an amazing segment. I think one of the things that people don't prepare anyone for, loss or victory.
Yeah.
And speaking with John just off camera before he came on, the idea that you go into power, you seek it, when you get it, nobody really tells you how to juggle all of it and balance life. And he says he can spot the people who are on track to flame out. And but also the hope, I thought, was that there are many careers that come back probably after you get life in order and things back in balance.
Look at those three presidents who lost House races. You know, I mean, how unlikely, I'm sure at the time when they lost these House races, that anybody would ever think they would become president of the United States. I mean, amazing. Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, all three of them lost House races. I didn't know about Clinton's House race. I knew about the other two.
Well, and that's the idea of, learning from the valleys of life, and presidents learning from deep personal loss, from deep personal failure, from political failure. Political failure, I think, is one of the hardest because you are exposed in front of your friends and your neighbors, and they have to make this rendering on you, and they say, well, you're not up to it, and so we're sending you home. And so I meet retired politicians all the time who have gone through this life cycle, and I say, why did you run in the first place? And then what did it feel like when you lost? Or what was it? And they're still living with that. And what John says at the end, when you ask the question of whether or not it's important to have a personal faith, a real faith, trusting in something bigger than yourself, that is the only thing that is going to sustain someone through loss.
Yeah. Well, I know what it is to be a losing candidate. Having lost that race for Congress.
Did you bounce? How long was the bounce back for you, and what was it like the day after the defeat?
The day after the defeat, it's really sobering, because what happens is, you've got all these people that are cheering for you and that are your volunteers and that think you're going to win, and then when you lose, the people just scatter. And I remember coming back to the campaign office the next day after the loss, and nobody was there, and literally having to do a lot of stuff myself, and not knowing where to start.
You take down the yard signs.
Yeah, I should have taken them all down, but they were everywhere. Some lasted well past the campaign, and so it was a very humbling experience.
It shakes your identity, I think, for a while.
Yeah, it does.
You find your footing, and finding it in something permanent and eternal is a far better place, I think, to find it than the temporary high of saying, hey, maybe you should run for, what do you think about the next job?
Right. It was wonderful for me to become grounded, I think. I'm a believer. I believe in Jesus. I want to be Christ-like. And the temptation for human beings is to be about you, is for your ego we love it when our egos are massaged, and you see your name in bright lights on a billboard somewhere. Imagine that, people driving their car with a bumper sticker with your name on the back.
Sure.
I mean, all that stuff is heady stuff, and it plays to your ego, and defeat is very humbling. And brings you back down to earth and makes you realize how transitory all this is. These cycles for the House of Representatives are only 2 years. Every 2 years is a new person, a new crop of candidates. And it makes you realize that at the end of the day, whatever you do ought to be for God, and in this case, for country.
This idea of a servant, public servant. I think we want to talk about the idea in grand terms about going into public service.
Right.
But when it actually comes time to being a shadow, being anonymous, being a co-sponsor, not the prime sponsor, being second on the ballot, not first, it's those instances that really begin to test the character of a person and reveal what's inside.
Yeah. We ought to be servants.
Great show today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. God is so good. Well, thank you for making time to be with us on State of Independence. Our mission is to find ways to help you in your own life. Learn how to trust God more deeply, to love your neighbor more fully, and to become a light in the darkness. No matter who the president is or who's in power in Washington, D.C. If you have a minute, drop me a line in the comment box at joewatkins.net. I see every one of them and I'll respond. Special thanks to my friend, Newsmax White House correspondent John Gizzi. We could all learn to listen better and more deeply to each other. If you found the conversation helpful, share by going to joewatkins.net. Until next time, God bless you, and thanks for watching. I'm always anxious to get his take, because he has such a wealth of understanding, get his take on people who are currently in office and what's likely to happen going forward.
Yeah. Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different. Made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you.